Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Legal Pathways podcast. Today, I'm here with my very good friend, Mona Maerz. Mona and I have been working together for more than 12 years, working on projects, initiatives, and presentations to promote more effective ways to practice law and deliver professional services. Mona is an honors graduate of Georgia State University College of Law. She began her legal career in the U.S. with the corporate group at the Jones Day law firm. Later, she went on to become assistant general counsel for Cumulus Media and then as vice president of client solutions for Legility, where she also was general counsel. Among the many projects we worked on together that Mona coordinated for us, she conducted a review for us of more than 200 contracts over Thanksgiving weekend that she and I mapped out while I was sitting in the Delta Sky Club writing on a cocktail napkin. Mona, do you remember that project? Really helped us out a lot.
Fun times, fun times.
Yeah, good times for sure. So after that, we went on to do some more presentations, including in 2018, two presentations on knowledge management and technology for legal departments and law firms. So as a follow-up to that in 2019, Mona suggested developing a presentation on metrics and measuring legal services to maximize client work and use of services. So we did a presentation. We took it on the road through the Association of Corporate Counsel to Atlanta, Cincinnati, and New Jersey. Mona, thank you for joining us here today. That 2019 road trip brings back a lot of memories, particularly when we talked to clients afterwards and talked to the participants who were having trouble demonstrating to their clients and their organizations how they were making a difference. And after the presentation, we got so much feedback that people finally felt they were able to discuss and validate their own contributions in a
Mhm.
value neutral way. Why do you think this was such a resonating topic to those participants?
Yeah, so Charles, first of all, thank you for having me today. I always love hanging out with you. It's just so much fun. I think there were several factors that came into that at the time, to be fair. The idea of metrics to legal services and to apply them to legal services was fairly new, right? We're talking 8, 9 years ago. It's still being written about today, right? I just saw an article yesterday that kind of talked about the exact same things that we talked about 8 years ago. So, think back in the time when this was being first introduced to lawyers, and lawyers didn't really know how to do that, right? The only metric that we were really good at keeping was what I call an input metric, and it was time. And we really perfected that down to the zero 0.6 measure, right? We were really, really good at it. And how many hours you worked and how many years of experience you had, that is how we defined value, right? In our own community and our success, whether it was the rank that you took up in your law firm, how you got compensated based on hours. So we were very, very good at that, but that was kind of the only metric we knew. And then clients started asking, saying, well, those are not really metrics that we're interested in, right? We're not so much interested in the input metric. We're interested in results and outputs, right? We may have a sales team. And yes, we track them and we understand how many calls they make and how many meetings they take just for accountability and also to see what's working. But the metric that we're interested in, that they get compensated on, that determines whether they move up in rank and that defines their success, is revenue generation. And it's not how much time they put in. That's just a means to the end. So now lawyers are being asked to collect metrics and provide metrics that they have frankly never done before. They've never learned how to measure output or result. And I think then you pair that with the introduction of metrics into legal services, which at that point in time was really done by forward-thinking, larger legal departments. Let's be fair. Those were the ones who had the money and the resources to be innovative and figure that out. So the first tools that were coming out, the first topics that were coming out were highly complex tools. There may have been a contract management system that was designed for a larger legal department, had a lot of functionality, a lot of already built in automation and other things. And when lawyers, either with smaller legal departments or law firms or even mid-sized departments looked at that, they thought, yeah, we can't do that. We don't even know where to start, right? We don't understand how that works and how's that even going to get adopted. So I think what we did, and I did that in my legal department by trial and error, and I know you did that as well. We just started really small, right? And we started giving people hints and tips about how can I just start collecting small number of metrics, things that really matter. Where do I even start with what metric is interesting to me? How do I not get overwhelmed? And how can I create something that's not very timely, cost effective, gets me to a quick result that I can start testing out? And I think we had kind of started figuring that out. So when we told people about that, I think the hope that people could learn about it and adopt it and understand it really rose. And that's what we were feeling, I think, in those meetings.
Yeah, I think it really was a shift that we were detecting and is still ongoing from, like you said, measuring time as our
Hmm.
only metric to understanding what was important to the client. Because to a law firm and a legal service provider, time is revenue, but to the client, time is a cost item when it's measured that way.
That's right.
Yeah, but shifting from time as simply a tool for the service provider to something that can translate into value for the client.
Yeah, and I think all that is taking everything a step further, right? It's if you say I put in this much time, right? Let's say you say our department conducted 10 training sessions in the HR environment. That's a really great metric to collect and have. It's not very hard to take it a step further and say, okay, can we collect a metric around, do we have fewer complaints? Are employees happier, right? Because our managers are trained better. Could we do a survey showing what the time that we put in did to enable the business to make the business better was not something brand new. It was just taking the second step to the metric that we were already taking, right? And just adding on another metric. And I think once people started embracing that and understanding that legal wasn't really that far removed from the business, that all we had to do is measure just one more thing that could translate it to the business of what it meant to the business. There was a bit more hope. I think that it could be accomplished.
Yeah, I think hopefulness was a theme that we detected in those conversations, that people now could realize that they could have some simple tools to translate what they did into how it was impacting their
Mhm.
client's business.
For sure.
So, Mona, you were kind enough several times over the last 5 years to talk to my law school class, and when we presented this to the students as opposed to the legal practitioners,
Uh-huh.
we got a reaction that was very surprising to us.
Yep.
And I think I can summarize it this way. It is something to the effect of, if my work as a future lawyer becomes reduced to a set of measurable metrics, what's left in my workday? Am I just going to be reduced to a cog in a machine? What's the space for my creativity, my agency, and my well-being to have downtime and to have time for planning and reflection? What was that the message you took from that reaction?
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember it taking us by surprise. And I think what we had assumed, and I now realize we can't assume that, is that we assume that transparency and collaboration, which are things that metrics give you, are good things. Right? That's what we always assumed. We're like, if I know what everybody's working on, if everybody's being transparent and telling me, and I can collect metrics around it, right? How many projects are we getting in? What are you working on? Not just how many hours a day. And then let's collaborate across the board on what we're working on and how we can do knowledge exchange and make that better. People felt a loss of autonomy in the sense that they were feeling micromanaged. You were looking over their shoulder. You were trying to control them. And that surprised us because I think we had assumed that people assume that everybody is a good actor because maybe you and I are good actors in terms of good managers, right? That we come from a place of goodness and we want the best for our people. And so transparency and collaboration are good things because they allow us to elevate people. They allow us to give more time to think about how to make their lives better, our lives better, get a more strategic look. But I mean, it became very clear to me after, think about the law school experience. From day one, we're kind of pitted against each other, right? You're
Mhm.
competing against the class. You're trying to become number one. So collaboration isn't really something that we're very good at. And transparency, to show our cards and tell somebody where we are in the process, maybe even how many interviews we've gotten, who we're talking to. We didn't really want to show that either, right? Because we wanted to keep our competitive edge. When I look back on it later, I thought, well, transparency, which metrics create, can feel a little threatening, right? Metrics can create threatening. Somebody's looking over my shoulder. Somebody's trying to micromanage me. They're trying to take away what only I know and what I need to hold on to. And now everybody knows it. It started making sense to me after you and I talked about it that that's not really what we were bred to do from the get-go.
Yeah, I did some reflection on that as well afterwards, and it occurred to me that trust is something that's built over time,
Mm-hmm.
and so you and I have been practicing in the field for a number of decades, and the law students were net new to the profession, so they had not had the time to experience the value of collaboration, the value of transparency, and the positive attributes it brings to the entire process. They simply had
Yeah.
not had that exposure that you and I have had.
And they haven't worked around good actors, right? They didn't know what a good manager could do and how much it could help them. And I think one of the things that you and I concluded from that later was for leaders in the legal industry and in the legal field, whether it's the GC or a legal department manager, is that when we start talking about to folks about metrics, we have to give them a why. We have to give them really good reasons because they don't have those assumptions that you just talked about, right? We have to say, here's how it can help you, here's how it can help us. And I think once people understand the why and they understand that the purpose and the goal is good, then they will be more open, right? Because you and I have also talked about it. You can implement as many metrics as you want. If they're not being adopted, if we can't integrate them, then they're really not helpful at all.
Someone in our next iteration, that student presentation, you did something very cool. In our set of materials, you added a single picture of a clock at a railway station. And I'd love for you to tell our listeners something about that image and what it means for this conversation.
Yeah, so I'll start with how it ties back to, I think, the students. So the students, obviously, and by the way, most lawyers will get really aggravated if you tell them that we're collecting data about the work that they do, right? So if we're collecting data about when did a request for a contract come in? How quickly did you respond? How much time did it take you to negotiate? Did we communicate back and say, hey, the contract was received, it's coming at this time? It feels more like administrative tasks and it feels annoying and it doesn't feel like you're being a lawyer, right? So those tasks generally get devalued by us as lawyers because we don't deem them to be very intellectually challenging or even worthy of our attention. So then I read an interesting article about what had happened in London with the tube. And 2 years ago, they started expanding it into the bus system. And the article started by saying an unquantifiable wait is an anxious wait. And what they meant by that was, so we've always had schedules posted. If you've ever lived in Europe or used public transportation in a larger US city, you know, you get the schedule of when the bus is leaving and arriving, but those are never quite accurate. You know, there are delays, things happen on the road. So they found that while people were waiting for the tube, if it was 4 minutes late or 5 minutes late, because people didn't know if it was going to be 4 or 5 or 10 minutes late, they just knew it was late, or they didn't even know when it would come at all. It was an unquantifiable wait and it made people anxious. So that had two consequences. They perceived the wait to be longer than it actually was. It was a negative experience. And they also got anxious because they had other things to do. But they didn't know whether they had time to run off and get a coffee real quick or use the bathroom or maybe make a phone call or do something else productive in the meantime, right? Because they just didn't know. So they adopted these real-time clocks that they put in that said the train is now coming in 6 minutes and 22 seconds. And then somebody thought, oh, I can go and get a croissant. I can go use the bathroom, or I can call Charles real quick and talk to him about this one thing that I need to get done at work. And it improved the quality and the perception of the tube system immensely. Just the perception and the feeling that people had about that. So as a legal department, bringing it back to the students who said, well, those administrative tasks and measuring metrics and to what we take in, if we can have a really, really tiny tool, a system, and I don't love spreadsheets, there are other small tools, but let's just say we had it that said, so we had one attorney on my team, and I got the feedback that she's no good. Sales hated her, that we don't like her. She's not responsive. She's never available. She's always late. And we had already established a tool where I could see when contract requests were coming in, when they got picked up. And we, for ourselves, had said we have a 48-hour turnaround time for anything that's not overly complicated, and when they would get pushed back out. And I looked at all of her data, and I thought, it's interesting. She's actually turning stuff around within 42 hours. So not only is she meeting the time, she's ahead of the time. So why is sales telling me that she's late and they don't like working with her? So I had a talk with her and she said, I just don't like talking on the phone. So if they picked up the phone or they wanted to talk to her or ask about something, right, she never picked up. And she also didn't send them an email back real quick saying, hey, got it, picked it up, I'll be back to you in 48 hours. So they had sent their request off and they would sit there and wait and they would wait. And it was really important. They would try call her. She never picked up. And so even though she was ahead of time, they were unhappy, dissatisfied. It was an unquantifiable wait. And so they had a really bad perception of her, which was not true. So we made two improvements. Because I had the data, right, I could go to the sales reps and say, listen, this lawyer is phenomenal. the work she's doing is great. And by the way, she's getting it back to you in 42 hours. This is just a bad perception. But here's an improvement we're going to make to you. We're going to automate a little function that says received. And when a lawyer picks it up, they're going to send you a little quick note and say, got it. It's being reviewed. Be back to you in 48. And that way the sales rep can now go and they can continue their sales. They can meet with people. Their mind has calmed and they can accomplish other productive tasks without sitting there going, when is this coming back? I haven't heard from anybody. So I think that is something that if we explain to people how beneficial metrics can be, even though it's a terrible task to do and it's annoying, can be really helpful.
Yeah, it's interesting that we perceive of time as a fixed thing. But as Einstein showed 115 years ago, there are slight variations based on the place from which we perceive it. So
That's
that
correct.
to the consumer of services, just like that passenger at a railway station, the time seems to go on eternally while we're waiting for something to happen. Whereas for the producer, the lawyer who's talking to clients on the phone and trying to meet their turnaround time, it seems like it's something that is an object that has to be filled, and it only by measuring it and having a metric can we show them that way they get advantages by having client success, by demonstrating their timeliness, and it's just a different persuasion that is applied to the provider as opposed to the consumer.
Yeah, and I think it's the compassion and the empathy to understand other businesses and departments, right? And what's important to them. I had a lawyer tell me, well, once they've sent it to me, they just need to trust that I'm working on it. And it's almost like a personal insult, that you want to check up and understand it. But, once you start explaining the psychology behind it and why those things are necessary to demonstrate success to the business, I think people get it. You just have to understand that it's not just about you.
That's right. And then instead of diminishing trust, it can actually build trust.
Yes, it can.
So we talk about, people in the workplace inevitably are compared to each other. Some are perceived as fast and responsive. Some are perceived as slow and, difficult to work with. How can metrics help us as managers to level that disparity and level the playing field?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you and I talked about that the other day. Beginning metrics and continuing metrics that level the playing field. So I will say this, right? Especially as a woman, and this is my own bias, having started practicing 30 years ago, when it was still, oftentimes very much a boys' world, I felt sometimes not equipped to show my value because I may be more of an introvert. You wouldn't know this from how much I smile, but I am. I don't always like to toot my horn. But because there weren't metrics and people couldn't objectively understand what I was working on or doing, we were relying on associates being in the office, stopping by a partner's door, making themselves seen, talking about golf, talking about baseball, talking about any kind of other sports, right? Relating to people in other ways that made the manager or the partner think that they were, hardworking, smart, interesting individuals, right? Because you didn't really have any other metrics. I mean, I remember knowing that my first partner would always hit the office at 7:30, so I was there at 7:15, and knowing that he never left before 6:30, so I would never leave until after 7. Is that a productive way to spend your day, just so that someone else perceives you, as a hardworking individual? That's silly when we think about it today, right? I mean, I don't know if your days ended up if you did the same thing early on to demonstrate that, right?
Yes.
Right. And so if there was only a way where, and then, I read this very interesting book by Susan Cain Quiet, right, that says how we can pay attention to and value introverts in a world that can't stop talking, right? Because introverts are actually highly undervalued because if you're relying on impressions and subjectiveness, right, you have to make yourself heard to be seen. And so extroverts are much better at marketing themselves. But what if there was a world where we didn't have to market ourselves so much, and where whether or not you belonged to a minority group, or no matter who you were, it just didn't even matter anymore, right? Because we could see objective data. We could see what you're working on, how many hours you've worked, what expertise you're developing, right? Because I could look at my contract lawyers team and I could see, wow, that's the 5th type of this contract that this person has reviewed. She must have developed some kind of expertise by now. Maybe that's something we can further. Let's send her to a seminar on that. Maybe she can start pitching herself as an expert here, as having developed a new skill set. What if we had all that available to level the playing field? Wouldn't that be amazing to a lot of us? Now, I see how extroverts are really great at marketing may take issue with that, but I think for the majority of people, it would just be wonderful to be measured on something a bit more objective.
Yeah, and it's an interesting mix because uh, study by Larry Richards and others show that lawyers score very high on introverted tendencies, but
Hmm.
yet in order to communicate to our clients, to be effective advocates, negotiators, etc., we often have to assume extroverted traits and behaviors. So, the like you said, the using metrics and measuring actual time to task, that can level the playing field between people who struggle between those two poles.
Absolutely.
So, as professionals, we want to be judged based on performance, but that's not always the
Hmm.
case. Like you've talked about, perception is important. There's the halo effect where, people who make a good first impression tend to be judged more favorably. Without that kind of verifiable, measurable data, in fact, we don't know what we're being judged on. So it's hard to assess our credibility, our standing, and our effectiveness with our organization and even with our clients.
Yeah, I think you and we got a lot of pushback in the early days of being measured. And I think what you just said is really interesting. People assume that if we're not collecting metrics, you're not being measured. Well, yes, you are. You just don't know what you're being measured on, right? You're being measured on someone's subjective impression of you. So I think if I know and I assume that a form of measurement is happening in any event, right? Metrics are being collected about you. Then I would rather like to be in control of the type of metrics that are being collected and the things that I can and want to share about the work that I'm doing than leaving it up to someone else who is measuring me entirely subjective based on their own life experience and on their own biases. And I don't even really know what I'm measured on. The hard and truth fact is we are always being measured, right? So let's make it objective and let me have some say in what it is that you're basing your judgment on.
To me, that was one of the 2 or 3 most powerful conclusions we learned out of doing this presentation process,
Yes.
that very fact that we are being judged whether we know it or not. And so why not take the initiative and select the factors on which you and your group should be judged, things that are relevant to your organization, things that you and your team can deliver on. I think if honestly, if there's one point that our listeners can take away from this conversation today, I would say that that is it, that you are always being observed and judged by others, whether you know it or not. So why not take the initiative and put it into terms that you control and then you can meet?
I agree. And as you always say, comparing apples to apples, right? If I have 10 associates or 10 people in my legal department and we're all working on the same basis and metrics that we're being judged on, that is freeing to me, right? Now I don't have to try so hard anymore to be special or impress someone on a personal level. I can focus better on work, right?
And I think that that is so leveling and empowering that people of
Absolutely.
any background, any group can all be equal and
Yeah.
on equal footing with those types of measurements.
And I think what's part of that too is that we also don't have to be afraid of being measured in those metrics because again, we have to assume that our managers are good actors, right? They're good people. So let's say I'm falling short on some of the metrics. I'm not sitting there assuming, well, I'm going to get fired. But what I'm hoping for is that somebody says, well, here's some metrics where I can see you're comparatively not doing so well. So what can we do to get you to level up? How can we support you? How can we train you better? They wouldn't have hired you in the first place if they didn't think that you were worth it, right? It's too much hassle to always punitively let people go and rehire. So I think if we just kind of take fear a little bit out of the equation, which is very, very hard to do because humans are 80% driven by fear, right? Every action that we take, everything that we don't do is always driven by fear. If we can take that out and just assume that we could also identify things that we can get better at, and it's okay that we have things to get better at. To this day, there are a million things I need to get better at. If we can just embrace that, then even metrics that don't appear to be such good metrics to begin with, they could end up being really great metrics because they help you to identify where you can get better.
Yeah, for sure. So I was talking to the students the other day about the concept you and I have discussed before called MVP, minimum viable product. It's a
Yeah,
concept borrowed from the software development community. And it's kind of the opposite of what we tend to do as lawyers,
for
where
sure.
we edit, we work, we revise, we fine tune our product to the nth degree. And when we finally feel it's perfect, we unveil it to the world and give it to the client. But at that point, we may not have any way of knowing if we've met the client's standard and criteria or not. So to me, that aligns with our topic of metrics and measurement, that if we can get our work out to our clients efficiently and quickly, we can get that feedback and then we can fine tune the work product to meet the measurement that's fit for purpose for the client.
I agree. And a lot of that, again, goes back to the fear we just talked about, which is why I think you had that thought is, when I first, when I was a first year, a second year, and I would write a memo, right? And a period was out of place, or a comma was out of place, or I didn't get my two periods after a full sentence, right? It was red all over and marked up, and it was a terrible work product. And so I think it was bred into us very, very early on that we just needed to be absolutely perfect, right? We didn't really learn to step back and say, but the more questions I ask, the more vulnerable I am, and the more knowledge I seek, the more competent I will become for my client, and the more they will respect me for it. When we did all these databases for clients to figure out what were the right metrics to collect, what were the right things to do, we never got it right on the first try because the client wasn't even really sure, right? They threw out the first idea, we should collect these 5 or 6 metrics to accomplish this goal. We dug a little bit deeper. We did it. We turned it around. The client looked at it. We looked at it. We thought, yeah, but you're kind of missing out over here. Do you want to tweak this? Do you want to tweak that? And, within 2 weeks, we had something that had maybe been turned around 5 times, but it was exactly what they needed. And to your point, if I had taken those 2 weeks and just kind of done it in my own head the whole time, right? It would have just delayed the product. And I think one of the things that we learned early on was that being on time and maybe having it be 80% is maybe a B minus. Being late is an F. I don't care how perfect it is, right? If you can't get things done for your client in time and help them resolve things quickly, that's just an F, even if the work product was perfect in the end. And I think I thought of this later, Charles, in litigation and e-discovery, we got comfortable around that a long time ago, right? We used to have, when I first started in the M&A department, and we didn't have a deal, hundreds of attorneys sitting on the top floor looking at every email by hand that had come in, right? And then in e-discovery. And then the massive amount of data forced us to cull the data before we even allowed lawyers to look at it. So we deployed, machine learning and AI tools to cull the data. And even judges, when they allowed for that, made the concession that we may miss a couple, right? It's not going to be perfect. We're not laying human eyes on everything, but 80% is better than nothing. We're not going to bankrupt companies now by doing that. And we'll probably find the most relevant information. So the MVP we got comfortable there because we were forced into it, right? Because we had too much data that people just couldn't look at. We couldn't get it perfect every time. So I think as corporate lawyers and in other areas, we can learn from that. And we can say, well, MVP should be good enough on everything. We need to let go of this fear that we have to be so perfect all the time. It's good to ask follow-up questions and to say, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't really understand that. Can we drill a little deeper?
Yeah, and the advent of email and e-discovery
Yeah,
really drilled that in the litigation front that, with, tens of thousands of emails under discovery, if a party can create the keywords and produce 98 or 99% of it, that's sufficiently okay as long as there's an honest effort to supplement and to,
right.
respond to a further discovery and there's no sandbagging or stonewalling, as long as we have that transparency, that measurement, that trust, even in an adversarial process like discovery, we are still subject to the court rules, and we have a duty to continually improve that response for things that are relevant, not privileged.
Mhm.
within scope, et cetera. So I think e-discovery to me illustrated that point early on. And then some of these concepts like MVP just reinforce it in terms of our day-to-day work product.
Yeah.
Speaking of going back in time to e-discovery and the advent of email, I want to take a tour back in time to the COVID. So I want to talk about the advent, yeah, without the without the shutdown effects. But now that we're kind of beyond that, we still have the structure of remote and hybrid work that's been validated and proved to be effective in many ways. But I wonder if you've seen a connection between remote and hybrid work and using metrics to perhaps make that easier to validate and to continue to build a case for.
Yeah, for sure, right? I mean, I would not have known how to manage my legal department through COVID if we hadn't already been on the path of collecting metrics and understanding what my team was doing. Because I think before, we were all in one office, you could walk the hallways, and we had, what you and I talked about earlier, sort of sometimes the random exchange. Hey, what are you working on? What are you doing? Hey, where's that contract? What's that vendor doing? What about this litigation? There was a natural flow of information that just kind of happened throughout the workday. And hopefully we picked it all up. Maybe we didn't, but I'm sure there was a lot. So now, unless we're all having our Zooms on and working in real time with each other all the time and speaking up every once in a while and simulating that we're in an office, there wasn't really a way for me to understand if we're meeting client goals and what we were doing at all. It wasn't so much about is everybody working 8 or 10 hours a day? But it was about, all right, how many demands have come in? What matters are we working on? What's open? What's pending? What needs to get addressed? Does anybody have something that's of importance that's been open or pending for 2 or 3 days that nobody's gotten to yet? And how do we figure out where that sits and who takes it next, right? So we did like a little legal team manager at the time that it was very, very easy, but we just logged and we had one assistant who was also doing many, many other things, right? But it was great because we had an inbox where everything came in and she could, classify it by matter. She could say this is an HR matter, this is with the CFO and billing, or this is a contract, or this is for a vendor, or this is an InfoSec issue. And then we would have attorneys go in and pick it up, right? Somebody would mark, I picked it up, I got it. And then I would go in like twice throughout the day and just kind of take a look at, okay, what's been coming in that nobody's gotten yet? Is there anything here that's really important that we need to have covered off today before somebody starts, screaming or something bad happens? And then every other day, we had a 1-hour team call. So that was good to have that tool and to just understand what's open, what are we working on, who's keeping us busy. That helped a little bit also maybe retraining some people, right? If we felt that a particular person was keeping us more busy than other people and was sucking up more time, is there a way that we can go out and maybe retrain them on being a little bit more self-sufficient before they come to us because other peers of theirs are doing better and they're not sucking as much time? But it helped me as a leader understand how can we make the business happy and still meet our goals. And then what it helped us with was the knowledge sharing. And that's what I talked about earlier when I said transparency and collaboration, we have to assume are good things. So we would get on a call for an hour every other day. And I would say, all right, let's go through this first and let's make sure everybody's covered off. What are your needs? Do you have all the resources that you need? Is there something hard you're working on that you currently cannot figure out? And is there somebody else here who has just observed this or seen this? And because I had a larger view, I could say, hey, I believe, Kaylee was just working on something like this a month ago. Do you want to let Will know real quick how you resolved that or what you did? Because I could see metrics and data on how that happened. And we could also then share about, hey, I solved something really cool today. And in case you guys ever come across this issue, here's where it is. And I feel like if we hadn't had that, if I hadn't had the data to look at, workload balance, right? I could look at someone and say, oh my gosh, they've got these 12 things on their plate and Kaylee finished early on this. And pick up the phone and say, can you call Will and take 2 of his things off his plate, right? If you're not in an office and somebody can't come to you and say, oh my gosh, I'm so swamped, I don't even know what to do. How do you solve for all these things if you don't have metrics where you can look into your team and then have your team talk with each other to solve for it together?
That's a great illustration of how to use metrics to manage in
Mm-hmm.
that remote environment where you cannot physically see people. And the fact that somebody's in the office 10 or 12 hours a day is not that relevant. It's because now they're at home in their own environment. So having those check-ins and that balancing ability not only helps to balance the workload and help your team members, it also helps the client to make sure that their work is getting done, and B, like you said, to understand where they may have expectations that need to be
Yeah.
adjusted, or we may need to adjust in how we're responding to them.
I agree with that. It was, I cannot tell you how many general counsels I talked to at that time who didn't even have a spreadsheet, who just didn't know, right? Who didn't have an overall view of what the whole team was working on. And that's hard. I don't know how you mentioned. And I think you mentioned earlier the word of trust as well. So I do get that. I learned this new word this week, microshifting. I do love how everybody now wants to microshift, right? And that basically means I'm working 2 hours in the morning. Then I want to go and see my doctor and I want to get my hair done. And then I'm working for another 4 hours. And then I want to maybe take my friends out to dinner, but then I'm going to work again at night for another 3 hours, right? So I'm getting all my hours. If you, I think, want that kind of trust to where managers feel comfortable to let you microshift, right? Then I think metrics are important. There needs to be some transparency and visibility into what you're doing, unless you've worked with someone for 10 or 12 years, and that shouldn't offend you in any way, shape, or form. Trust has to be earned, right? And unless we've worked together for 10 years, I kind of need to also know what you're doing if you want that kind of freedom.
You introduced that term to me the other day of microshifting, and we talked about some of the pros and cons versus the
Okay.
opposite, which is sort of a deep work focus, like Cal
Yeah.
Newport described in his recent bestseller. Share with our listeners what the survey data shows as the style of those two, which resulted in more satisfied workers.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what you say, that you sometimes just need a window, right, of time where you can do deep thinking, and that metrics will actually free you up and allow you to create those windows where you can look at it from a big picture perspective and say, wait, what I'm actually seeing is that strategic type of thinking that just doesn't come when you're in the daily hustle and bustle. And they call people segregators and integrators. And they say microshifters are integrators. They integrate their work into their day, probably over a 12 or 14-hour period of the day, right? So it's great because you have the freedom to go to the doctor's appointment when you want to, or to get your hair done when you want to, or to go on the bike ride when you want to. But it also means that your work and your private life lines get kind of blurred, and you're in essence on all the time. You're working all the time, right? It's always in the back of your mind. You never really let that go. Whereas the people they call segregators, who take maybe an 8-hour window to just focus on work, and that's all they're doing, right? It allows them that strategic and deep thinking that you talk about, where sometimes you just need 3 or 4 hours to sit back and look at it. But it also allows them the time to not blur the lines and to draw the line more clearly. And the study actually found over a 2-year period that segregators ended up emotionally being happier. Who would have thought that? I really thought that I always wanted to work from home for the rest of my life and be a microshifter so that I can get the laundry done and I can fit it all in, right? But little do I know that now work is present with me all the time, way into the evening hours. And that can have its hazards as well.
Yeah, that's a mindset that developed during COVID, I think, where many people developed anxiety and worry about being always on. So that
Mhm.
if you are at home and you're working through email or handheld, you can be reached 24/7. Whereas 30 years ago, unless somebody were to require a late night phone call, once you went home at night, you were pretty much off duty. So it's kind of
Yep.
blurring those lines between personal and professional has advantages for tasks and functions that you want to get done flexibly, but it can blur that line and create that sense of always on continuous stress.
Well, I thought was interesting what the study also showed was that if you tell somebody that you've taken 3 hours off in the afternoon to get your hair done or do something, they feel, especially manager, feels more entitled to maybe call you at 7:30 at night, right? And just ask a good question or send you an email because they knew that you took off the 3 hours during the day. And that happens when you work from home with microshifting too. People feel more empowered to contact you at all hours of the day because they feel like, to your point, that you're always on now because you took other periods off. So again, there are advantages and disadvantages to being on or just being a segregator and saying, at 6 o'clock, I'm going home and you can reach me again in the morning.
Yeah, for sure. Mona, one slide that we did that people like was managing with human-centered metrics. When
Mhm.
I say the word human-centered metrics, what does that mean to you?
To me, means what we talked about earlier, to me, the why. I need to understand why I'm measuring something. That's important for two reasons. Early on, we saw that people got really metrics happy. They understood the concept after you and I had gone on the road, and they were measuring anything and everything, right? They were like collecting 50, 60 metrics. It was insane. They never asked why they're collecting them. Like, oh, there's another data point. Let me grab that. And at the end of the day, they had huge data sets and they had no idea what to do with them because they never asked what was the purpose of me collecting. So I'm a big believer in starting with the why. Why am I looking at a metric? And that can be because I'm looking, for example, to elevate someone or empower someone and say, let me find out what this person is working on, what they're doing, where they could develop a new skill set, where I could send them, right? So that to me is a good metric where I'm elevating people. But I could also say, if I start with the why, a human-centered metric, let's say my CFO has come to me and says, I am getting so much pressure on increasing cash flow, right? The board and my CEO are managing breathing down my neck. We just got to get revenue in faster. 30 days, 60 days, right? Account is receivable. They've got to come in faster. They've got to come in faster. And I can take a step back and say, okay, how can I help you? I'm legal. I have this big set of contracts. And you and I know if you work in the service industry, you don't always get to apply your own template, right? You have to oftentimes work with your client's template. So when you have your own template and you say 30-day payment terms, I can probably start breathing down customers' necks after 30 days and start pushing on collection and get all that in, right? But if you're not always negotiating on templates, then you don't really know where you stand on what the body of your contract says about how quickly your money can come in. So I partnered with her and I said, why don't we take our 1,000 most important customers and just do a quick project and look at payment terms? What have they negotiated? 30, 60, 90, 120, or they only when we get paid by our client. And so when it turned out that the average for us was 66 days, we could go back to the board and the CEO and say, I know you want me to improve cash flow, but we don't have a legal basis to improve cash flow. I don't have anything. So my data, my metrics, the things that I was analyzing, that I was looking at, were in the smallest sense purpose-driven, and the why was asked. You can expand that to a number of whys, but I think that was kind of the smallest data point that we ever collected to get to a why, to get to a result that was helping a why.
Yeah, and that dovetails with the next thing I want us to think about, which is a great paper that Ron Dolan at Harvard Law School put out in 2020 after we did our work. And he talked about a similar thing, which is this understanding of a common understanding between lawyer and client, whether internal or external. And he talks about several points. And one of them that's directly relevant to your topic is that having an apples to apples comparison allows the client or the consumer to know exactly what they're getting, what's being measured, and then it reduces that knowledge gap that really plagues the profession when the lawyer knows everything and the client just gets bits and pieces of information.
I agree.
Yeah. He also talked about some other cool things like being able to scope our pricing better so that if I just know that me and my team work hard and we're very intelligent and we're, hardcore, that's not sufficient for us to be able to understand how long does it take for us to do an M&A transaction up to letter of intent? How long does it take to complete a due diligence project? You have to break that down into metrics and measurable milestones so that you can then scope your work and price it appropriately and let your client know what to expect.
Yeah, I'll tell you where that really comes in and is relevant is that, sometimes hourly billing isn't accepted anymore in the industry, right? And people are asking for value-based billing, right? Or billing per document or per contract or per. How would you ever know what to charge if you don't know your own cost basis, right? You're either coming up with a number that's too high because you're trying to play it safe and that's not really helping your client, or you're coming up with a number that's too low because you want to win the business and then that's not helping you. So we did a lot of small pilot projects for law firms or for ourselves or for clients that said, okay, if you want an NDA pricing, right? NDA is always viewed as this low-hanging fruit, not important contracts, but yet everybody wants one in place, right? For anything and everything they do. So you have to find a way to manage through them. And we classified NDAs, international NDAs, local NDAs, maybe even by product. And then we ran a team for 60 days and they recorded, right? From intake to marking it up to giving it to the other side. How long does an NDA take? And then we said, okay, an NDA of this type should take 25 minutes on average. So we came out and we said, okay, we can charge $65 per NDA. And that's fair to everybody. We make some money and you don't overpay. But that actual number is based on metrics and data that we compiled before we could come up with that pricing for you. And I would to this day challenge anybody, if somebody commits to a particular pricing without having done that due diligence phase or run the metrics, I don't know that you're getting the pricing that you deserve, Either one
Yeah.
of you, by the way.
Oh, it would be impossible to do it without those metrics.
So I think that's really important. Again, the why was being asked first, right? Why am I collecting the metric? Well, because somebody's asking for a fixed fee. All right, well, now I got to go and collect metrics to figure out how I get to a fixed fee.
Yeah, and Ron Dolan in his paper talks about something that occurred to me as well, that it gives you a range of offerings so that instead of just giving one price, you can tell your client, we can do this with a good, better, best type of offering. We can give
Oh,
you,
I like that too.
this integrated review that aligns with, prior precedent, or we can take it to a new level and experiment with something with predictive analytics and give you, different outcomes. So then the client can judge which of those approaches is best for their project. Not every project requires a gold-plated approach. Some things just have to get done quickly and competently, and then the client's ready to move on to something else. So that way, the professional service firm can provide a whole basket of offerings and broaden its market share.
Yeah, I think we always thought as lawyers that, right, only the best would do. That's what we talked about in the beginning, right? Only perfection will do. And it just turns out that's actually not the case. We're not that special. I know we like to think that we're special, but we're not that special.
No, it's a it also goes to this concept of unbundling. We each think every project is unique and special and something only I can handle. But in fact, most things in life can be broken down into component parts, right? Sort of a reductionist point of view, so that
Correct.
if I can measure what each project consists of, then I can better break it down and say, maybe you are the provider that needs to do this complex work, and someone else can do this more simple task at a different price point.
And maybe with AI, we get to the point where one provider can do it all because the simple task is being done by computers altogether, so that I, as the lawyer, can then focus on the more complex intellectual matters that I actually went to law school for.
Yeah, it's
Wouldn't that be nice?
we'll talk about AI at the end of the hour and how some of that can be achieved. We could, sort of optimize ourselves and effectively clone ourselves to free part of us to do higher work and part of us to compile and summarize. And then with our review, we could do that a lot more efficiently. Peter Drucker, the great quote, "You can't manage what you can't measure." What does that quote mean to you?
Yeah, I think it's what we talked about earlier. Just to be fair, if I cannot collect metrics about what I do, our productivity, how my team is doing, about output, how I'm benefiting the business, how much revenue I generated, right? If I can't have any of those measures, I can't manage to a particular outcome. I have no idea how to even get there. I need the data. If someone is telling me I want X, Y, and Z from you, right? I have to measure first. I can't manage something that I only have a subjective view on.
So in terms of managing our own performance, one of the things we talked a little bit about at the top of the hour was measuring time. One thing that you and I and every lawyer knows, tracking time is one thing that every lawyer hates to do.
Yeah.
How do you get lawyers to measure the time that they're putting into projects?
Yeah, I think, there are easy ways to do it. And I think you came up with one, which is, you take a sheet and you say, okay, I, as part of this legal department, generally work on these 8 things, right? These are the 8 types of categories of things that come in. And every time I work or touch one of those, I put a little check next to it and I say, I did this. And if it's a new thing that came in, I just add it to the list so I understand what are even the matters. Have I become an HR specialist? Am I all of a sudden starting to work more in data privacy because that's hot now and I'm helping the InfoSec team and I'm really getting an expertise there? And then if you work on something for more than 20 minutes a day or 30 minutes a day, if something is more time consuming, maybe you put a quick blurb next to it on what you did, right? So that allows you to understand the breadth of your skills and abilities, right? And then it allows you to understand the depth as well, where you can say, okay, I seem to be, I knew before in my head, of course, I'm not stupid, right? That I'm working a lot on data privacy stuff, but how much am I exactly working on data privacy stuff? And then personally, you can also find things where you can call someone and say, I think I need to stop doing that. So,
Woohoo.
if I find that, I'm just assisting collections way too much, or that I'm getting a lot of calls from the billing department about helping with collections, and I start writing down a little more detail, and I'm like, okay, that was a $700 collection. That was a $1,500 collection. And I can go to my GC and say, listen, I don't think they should be calling the legal department with that. That seems like a waste of my time and a waste of the legal time. I think we should either get an admin in there to do that, or they should turn it over to the collection agency and then write the rest of it off, because the money that you pay me is wasted on what I'm doing over here. And so I think once I can collect what I'm working on and I know what I'm working on, I can drive my own career a little bit better, because I have a better understanding that's not just in my head. So I don't just have to go to my supervisor and say, hey, just believe me when I tell you I've become really good at data privacy. Or just believe me when I tell you that Katie from billing calls me all the time and I shouldn't be working on this. No, here's a spreadsheet from the last, 60 days, and this is what I'm working on. And couldn't we make adjustments here or there? So if your manager or your GC isn't tracking it as an overall company measure, then do it for yourself so that you can drive your own career in the way that you'd like to drive it.
Yeah, then hopefully the two align, because then with that data, you can demonstrate to your manager exactly what things you're achieving.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's tough to do, right? It's countercultural as lawyers for us to think about
Uh,
things that we can offload or that are redundant and that one of us can stop doing, and maybe some other department can do it better than legal.
We really, really had to do that. So our legal department was just amazing. And I feel when you're amazing and you have very, very qualified individuals that you've collected around you, they always raise their hand to help. And so whether it is an HR initiative, an InfoSec initiative, a data privacy initiative, right? Because we are trained to be logical, abstract thinkers, and we understand how to problem solve, when we see that something is going sideways, we raise our hand and we said in my legal department, let me just help you with that. So for us, having the tool of what people are working on was really, really important every 90 days to look at, because there were things that we just simply had to start giving back and say, all right, we have now trained you on this. We have done the solution. You can no longer rely on us. Back to you. You've got to implement this now and you've got to run with it. And again, you don't know that unless you keep measuring what you're working on.
Yeah, in fact, after you and I started thinking about this, I went to our contract management system and realized there's a whole set of insurance files that we, as well as our risk management department, were maintaining duplicate sets.
Yeah.
So we set them up on the contract management system and let them take it over.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. Lawyers are meant to develop solutions. So it's amazing the things that we collect and take on that maybe is not the highest and best use of our time,
Yeah, for sure. We simply can't do it all.
but we want to.
Yes, like it or not. So speaking of that, one of the toughest questions we got on our roadshow was from audience members who said, how can I measure things that are difficult to measure, like transactions that did not close, broken deals, missed opportunities, contracts that did not execute? Are there relevant approaches for our listeners to adopt to think about areas where you may not have a tangible output as a metric?
Yeah, I think you can get a tangible output, and it's fairly easy. So let's take the question of contracts, right? If you have a small tool, and again, I go to a spreadsheet, even though I like databases better. And the last, you measure what comes in, you measure how long it takes, and your last data point is completed and signed. And then you can start sorting on all the ones that were not completed and signed, which is, by the way, we did. And then you can start looking at who asked for those. Is there somebody maybe in the sales team whose contracts, more often than not, don't actually go to completion? So two things. Is that person engaging legal too soon? Is it not ripe yet for where he hasn't primed the customer enough and the deal isn't secure enough and the customer may have not expressed enough interest yet, but he's already getting legal to spin its wheels because he knows that legal always takes long and it's a long lead line, and rather get that done real quick and get the contract drafted and back into my inbox so that when the customer is ready, I have it ready to present. Well, then the customer never gets there, right? So the educational measure there is, listen, unless you have a clear green from the customer, you cannot engage legal, right? It may also be the same in acquisitions, by the way, right? Proper larger company has an acquisition team that has defined the moment in time of when legal gets engaged. And it has said sometimes it's early on, so we can identify a few things in due diligence, but that may be only on a limited basis because until we have some form of deal certainty on the business level, and we have developed, triggers for that, we don't really want to start a full legal review. If you have too many deals that legal has spun its wheels on and has spent time on that have gone busted, you need to ask questions about that, right? And that's a question that goes beyond legal. When do we get involved? What caused the bust? And where do we save money? But again, without having collected that metric, without knowing how many deals you worked on that didn't go through, without knowing how many contracts you're leaving on the table every month, even though legal has put 100 hours in drafting and getting them out the door, it's very hard to even start pinpointing where the root cause might be and to create any kind of improvement.
Yeah, that's a really good way of explaining it, that when we take the time to examine the factors on which a deal is based, we may find some root causes that
Yeah.
are not in the metric the client expected. We may find root causes that create the bottleneck or the difficulty of why the project was not completed.
Yeah, the other thing you'll find that's really interesting is when it's not completed, and sometimes it's just the salesperson who never sent out the contract for execution. It's also a very great thing to follow up on. We, in the end, had once we had the contracts done and the negotiation was final, we would send out every week. We would get the data from our system and say, you still have 10 unsigned contracts outstanding and pending. But that's only because we also track contract by sales rep. And so then we knew who was associated with it. And every week we could just remind them and thereby get the signed documents in the database. So all kinds of ways that departments can work together once you have the data and the metrics.
That connectivity and that checklist helps you keep the reminders in flow.
Yeah, without having to do it by hand, by the way. I don't want to go through it every week and go through my emails and figure out what have I not done yet, which contract is still not signed. It takes way too much time. Who wants to do that?
The system makes it easier. So speaking of client feedback, I want to talk a little bit about client engagement. It's Rule 1.4 says lawyers have to communicate with their clients effectively. And in fact, the number one state bar complaint category typically is in client complaints about lawyer communication. How do we stay engaged and make sure we're meeting our clients' expectations without bombarding them or killing them with too much survey data?
Yeah, so I've always thought that a private meeting and asking them about their goals for the year or the quarter or the next 6 months is the best way to do that, right? If you understand what your client's primary goal is. So, for example, I just read in the ACC, which I was really encouraged about, that for 2024 survey established, and for 2025, 40% of general counsels have named operational efficiency as their primary goal for the year, for the department. So if I sit down, right, if I'm a law firm and I sit down with my GC and I understand, okay, here are the 2 or 3 primary goals that you're trying to accomplish for this year, then I have to figure out how I can help with that, right? And how every project that I do can now be viewed under that lens. So I help them to demonstrate that they're achieving that goal, right? And I can no longer go back to do the work the way I did it. I have to figure out, okay, now how can I demonstrate? How can I get metrics? Because they're going to need them to understand. In the same way, if I'm a GC, right, I sit down with my C-suite folks, or if I'm a lawyer that's responsible for a business line, and I just ask, what are the main goals for this year? And if somebody says our main goal is to outsource half of what we do in this department to a service center in Malaysia, then I can proactively go back and tell my team, hey, can we go back through, again, our most important customer contracts and figure out if anybody has a rule in there that non-US citizens can't look at any of their data? Because my business partner needs to know that. But that's because I asked about what their main goals are for the quarter, for the year. What are you trying to accomplish as a business? Where are you going? And as a lawyer, I need to step back and immediately go, is there any way that I can help them? And maybe I have to tell them, I'm so sorry, but you cannot outsource that to Malaysia because half the customers that utilize that service have a provision in there from their InfoSec team that no non-US citizen is allowed to look at the confidential data in the contracts or in anything that we work on. But that's something they need to know rather sooner than later, right? So For me, it's always important that I don't work in a vacuum, right? That I understand exactly what are your primary goals for this quarter, for the next 6 months, for the year. And everything that I do has to be tailored toward those goals and reflect those goals.
Yeah, I'm hearing in that, like, you're extracting metadata about the client's objectives, and then the nested goals that pertain to particular tasks or requirements kind of naturally fall in under that once you understand the metadata of what your client wants to
That's right.
achieve.
That's exactly right.
Mona, we've been talking about all the advantages of using metrics. Are there any
Mhm.
downsides or ethical risks of using metrics, overusing metrics? Anything we should point out to our listeners in this space?
Yeah, so I will tell you why I use my Aura ring only on and off. And that's exactly why metrics should be used probably on and off. So for those of you who don't know what an Aura ring is, it's similar to an Apple Watch, right? It tracks data about your sleep, about your steps, about your heart rate, about just almost anything body mechanics that your body does. When you have it, it's extremely helpful for a certain amount of time until you develop patterns that were based on the data that you collected that are now beneficial to you. So if I understand that my sleep scores are low every morning when I wake up, and it makes recommendations about maybe meditations or not being on my phone, or maybe getting some red light therapy at night, and that on average gives me another 30 minutes of deep sleep, or not eating too late, and I develop all of those incredible patterns and I incorporate them and I do them now, then I've achieved my goal. And at that point in time, I probably need to put the ring down for a while. Because if I don't put it down for a while, I end up living to the metric. Instead of the metric itself becomes the goal to perform to, not the life or the bigger picture. Does that make sense? And I think that's the danger of metrics, right? I found myself then waking up at night and thinking, shoot, I've woken up. I bet you that's going to give me a bad score tomorrow morning. I'm living my life and my purpose for the metric itself and for the performance of the metric itself. So I think we have to continuously go back and ask, why are we doing this? Is it still a purpose driven? Have I achieved the goal that I wanted to achieve by collecting this metric? Because remember, collecting metrics takes time. It takes time away from people. It can be a nuisance. People don't like it. Keeping a metric for the sake of a metric isn't very helpful, other than to maybe annoy you and get inundated with data that you no longer should be keeping around. And so I think metrics have to be living just as long until the goal is achieved. And we have, and not just a short-term goal, until we've developed a pattern, a habit that has changed the organization and has maybe created a new workflow. And now that metric is obsolete.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And to me, it's akin to journaling in our professional and personal lives. There's periods where I'm trying to focus, where I'm trying to make a change, where I'm taking on a new project or assignment, and I want to actually record some of my perceptions, my input, and my thoughts. And so I will journal every day. But once I get into a cadence where I know that that's my baseline and this is what we're going to do moving forward, then I may close the journal for a while and not journal for a few weeks. So I think if the investment of time is productive and is leading to positive outcomes, it should be done. But there's a time when we can embed the metric into our workflow and
Mhm.
then move on and find the new metric that we need to focus
Mhm.
on so we can get focused on the right things.
Yeah, and your goals and your questions will be ever changing. Somebody may say, we need to hire another lawyer, I need more resources. So then the metrics that you're collecting will be different. They'll be around what exactly are we working on, where should we plug this person in. So the metrics will change with the problems or the issues you're trying to solve for. And those questions will continuously be presented to you.
Yeah, it should always be fit for purpose and something that supports the underlying goal, which is to help our clients achieve their needs.
Correct. And you can't overmetric people, by the way. We also figured out, especially when it comes to time entry or saying what you're doing, we kind of figured out that 5 to 6 metrics were sort of a golden, right? If you asked people to enter more than 6 things about a project, right? So you're saying, what's the contract? What's the value? What's the complexity? Who's on the other side? If you started entering too many things about it and it took up more than, I want to say, 3 minutes, then people just weren't going to do it. And that's the other danger. If you over broaden metrics, your adoption rate is going to be low and people just simply won't use the system or reject the system or hate the system. And then that's not helpful either. So Also, making sure that the metrics are bite-sized and are customer and user-friendly is super important.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And remember when we were working on our presentation, there was a great paper we looked at from DLA Piper from their German, Meentz and Allen were the two authors from their
Mhm.
office in Germany that said their survey data showed that if the metrics were too hard to achieve, participants would simply deviate from them and do it their own way. So it defeated the whole purpose.
That's right.
Yeah, that's not where we wanna land. So, Mona, as we start to wrap up our time together, I wanna talk about the topic du jour in 2025, which,
Oof.
of course, is AI.
I
Here
knew it was coming, Charles. I knew it was
Yeah,
coming.
it wouldn't be 2025 without a discussion of AI. So here, I think it really is relevant because there are ways where AI can help expand our universe of data, our understanding, our interpretation, our prediction capability. What's your take on the role of AI in measuring and designing these metrics?
So I'm an optimist by nature, and I need to preview my comments with that because I think it takes an optimist by nature to have this attitude. If you're a pessimist, you might view this differently. I think it's going to be incredibly empowering. The things that I can only think up so many things in my head that I want to collect, and I only have so much capacity to digest things and sort through them, and find really, really interesting conclusions that I can then apply to make something better. If I just, I talked about earlier, had an assistant, right? If I just had something or someone to help with that, it can obviously force through larger data sets faster. It can absorb more information. What we just talked about, the metric fatigue, right? Where I didn't want to collect them before because I'm trying to manage to a human brain who just doesn't want to get tired of putting too many metrics in or they won't get adopted, right? But what if I had more? What if I could analyze more? What if I could make the business even better? And I think if we accept that it can help us, but that it's still up to us to intimately know our clients, whether it's an outside or an inside client in our business, and then understand where we can add the most value. I think that's freeing to me, right? To have that kind of assistance, because I like to think of myself as a really smart person and a really valuable business partner who can strategically help colleagues better the business, right? And make life better for everyone. But if I'm stuck down here somewhere in the mud all the time, very difficult to do. I really would love to see more of that coming in. Yes, it will replace certain things, right? It will replace what young lawyers used to do in their first, second, and third year of reviewing contracts and summarizing terms. But I don't know, is that what you went to law school for to begin with? Not sure. So maybe you would like to focus on some of the higher value and higher level stuff. So I welcome it.
Yeah, I think it really does present a green field in terms of the breadth and depth of
Mm-hmm.
knowledge resources that it's trained on and can pull together. And then we as trained professionals can pull, can sort, can analyze it, can assess the predictive utility of it. But boy, it sure saves a lot of time in those
Mm-hmm.
initial phases. I'm with you. I think, like Goldman Sachs said in their famous 2023 survey, it's likely to peel off some amount of work of routine legal work, but it's not going to be a big percent. They've actually dialed that prediction back from 40% to 17%.
Mm-hmm.
So if it peels off 17% of the work, I feel like we can augment that by, enhancing our strategic and predictive capabilities and make up that gap.
Well, and I would like to think it's the type of work that we don't necessarily want to do by hand in any event after having gone to law school.
Yeah, and that's the goal of metrics and measurement, right? We want to provide a better service offering as well as a better use of our time and a way to get people into a sweet spot, particularly newer and younger lawyers, to get them to be more productive and feel that their opportunity is being maximized. And
It is.
I think metrics give a great platform for that.
Charles, I want you to talk just for 1 minute. I know we're almost out of time, but talk about real quick change, because I think it's important to understand our breed. I think, if I remember correctly, was there a survey that talked about how well lawyers adapt to change? And weren't we the lowest scoring profession
Yes, yeah.
to embrace change?
Yeah, the data is still pretty consistent on that. The DLI change index survey put lawyers at the very, very bottom of amenability to change. below government bureaucrats and insurance companies. So obviously, tech entrepreneurs and engineers were much higher in change amenability, but lawyers have always been near the bottom. It's almost a chicken and egg thing that people may be attracted to law because of the precedent of the great gravity with which we approach change. But, in some respects, it can be an impediment that we are reluctant to tackle change, to embrace change. And that's something that we talked at the top of the hour about trust. It just takes experience and
Mhm.
time to build that trust that we can change things, including the way we work, in ways that are better, faster, cheaper, give a more inclusive and productive environment for the people we work with, and provide a better outcome for our clients.
Yeah, and especially when we think about AI, we just have to remember that, if we're lawyers, we talk to a lot of other lawyers. We tend to stay in our circle when we talk about these things. And if, as a profession in general, we're a skeptic and we don't like to change, and we need to keep that in mind. We need to keep in mind who we're talking to all the time and whether it would be really that bad if AI came in and helped us. Right? There is the fact that we just don't like the change either.
Yeah. Like you, I'm an optimist. I think that AI is simply another tool that helps us to synthesize, digest, and expand our learnings from the infinite number of facts that are
Hmm.
available to us in the universe, of which I can only detect a very small number by myself.
And you're very smart, so.
Well, I certainly will say the same for you. Let me tell you, Mona, it's been a pleasure to have you here today. I
Oh,
know our
thank you.
listeners will benefit from your expansive approach. This conversation about metrics will continue because we need to continue to use new technologies and new ways of working better. And I look forward to our next conversation on this.
Same here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Mona, thank you. And to our listeners, if you like what you heard today, please make sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite streaming platform. And that's all for today. I'm Charles Bowen for the Legal Pathways Podcast. Till next time.